56 years ago, this was my aeroplane, the one I learned to fly on, the one I got my pilot's license on. I was lucky enough to fly this type of aircraft in Zimbabwe. Today, I'm happy because I've seen my aeroplane again. And I have marvelous recollections in my heart. Because flying an aeroplane is a source of great satisfaction. I remember when I made my first takeoff here, and Captain Ali Boni, who was the airport commander, said to me, "Watch out." Watch out, he said, because up in the air, there's just you, the Lord, and the aeroplane. 1991. Now more than half a century old, a famous float plane has returned to fly at the water aerodrome of Como, which has a rich past history in aeronautics. It's the oldest original float plane in the world. It's the only pre-war aircraft flying in Italy, built in the period when aviation worldwide was at its peak, the 30s, when the aeroplane of the pioneering days was becoming a modern means of transport and an essential instrument of war. A 1931 advertisement said this about it: Caproni 100, the aircraft for the tourist and for the businessman. It costs 35,000 lira and consumes as much as a small car. It has dual controls. It lands on a 60-meter airstrip and takes off in 100 meters. It's easy and safe to handle. Parts can be replaced quite easily. It changes into a float plane. The interior arrangement is very comfortable. The wings fold. It can be housed in a garage and transported by rail. It can be fitted with various engines with pistons inline or radial. It can fly at 180 kilometers an hour and at altitudes of over 5,000 meters. It has an endurance of 4 hours. It set up records and achieved outstanding performances. It starred in countless sporting events. It was famous all over the world. Often, it was the symbol and source of inspiration for the futurists. Marinetti himself, founder of the movement, transmitted his proclamation in flight from a Ca.100. There was no ace in the Second World War who did not get his pilot's license or have his first flying experience on this plane. A very popular aircraft for flying schools, training and liaison, it was known by the nickname of Caproncino. It flew for 33 years until 1968. Then it was left out in the open for 17 years and was finally restored by a Milan business consultant so that it could once more furrow the skies over Como and plough its lake. After all the years it spent neglected in forgotten corners, this fascinating winged character definitely didn't expect such a spectacular comeback. It seems like a fairy story. Like the film stars of the 30s, it was now resigned to spending the little time it still had, abandoned in a sort of dignified oblivion, engrossed in its memories. Its new debut took place on a stage it had often trodden before. But as we know, for a finished actor, any public appearance is always the source of great emotion.
This
is a Caproni 100 built in 1935. The design is late 20s. This aeroplane was extraordinarily successful, since more than 2,000 of them were made. It then won a competition for aircraft for flying schools promoted by the Italian Air Force. As you can see, it's a two-seater biplane. The pilot's place is at the back. It has a 135 horsepower engine, a Colombo engine, 6 cylinders in line and 8,500 cc. It's very reliable, even though it does take a little time to start up. But then, once it's off, it's extremely reliable. This particular plane was built in 1935 as part of an Air Force order for Italy's Royal Air Force. That's why it's been restored to its original colors of the time, with the coats of arms and emblems that were used in those days. It was in service with the Air Force until 1940. In 1946, it was sold to the Como Flying Club. When I was 17, I wanted to get my pilot's license. I joined the Como Flying Club and began my first flights in this very plane. And I must say I was very enthusiastic. When the plane, now very tired out after years and years of work, no longer received its airworthiness certificate, it was stored in a hangar and left there to rot. Then, a private citizen took it into a garden, and it was left to the ravages of time in the open air for many years after that. So it became a real wreck. I acquired it in 1986, and after 6 years of restoration work, I'd made it exactly as it had been when it first left the factory in 1935. The engine was the greatest source of problems in restoration, because the work went on for 6 years and required more than 10,000 hours, which shows how complicated the job was. And it was made even more complicated by the fact that it wasn't very easy to find companies and mechanics who could do very much with an engine made in the 30s. About 30 years ago, I'd already flown this plane, but I couldn't remember its performances any longer. This year, when I started flying it again, I realized its performances were extraordinary. Better, I'd say, than those of modern planes. It's faster and it turns better, even though the engine has less horsepower.
Nonostante il motore abbia un numero inferiore di cavalli.
It's as if it had never stopped flying. Old and weary, it just stopped for a while to catch its breath. And now, in its natural surroundings, air and water, it has resumed its intrepid adventure.